Have you ever noticed something slightly uncomfortable? Something that doesn't quite make sense when you stop and think about it carefully? Your income has increased over the years. Maybe not dramatically, but steadily. A few years ago, you were earning less. Your lifestyle was simpler. Your expectations were lower. And at that time, you probably believed something very logical. When I earn more, things will feel easier. Less financial pressure, more breathing room, more control. But today, if you're honest with yourself, does it actually feel that way? For many people, the answer is no. In fact, despite earning more than before, life often feels just as financially tight, sometimes even tighter. You still think about bills. You still hesitate before making certain purchases. You still delay saving or investing decisions, telling yourself you'll start soon. And that creates a quiet but important contradiction. Because if income has gone up, why hasn't financial comfort followed in the same way? This isn't about extreme cases. It's not about people who are struggling at the lowest income levels. And it's not about the ultra-wealthy either. This sits right in the middle. People who are doing reasonably well. Stable careers, decent salaries, a lifestyle that looks, from the outside, completely fine. And yet, underneath that surface, there's a constant balancing act. Money comes in, and almost immediately it gets allocated, not wasted, not irresponsibly spent, just used. And that's what makes this so easy to overlook. Because nothing feels obviously wrong. You're not making reckless decisions. You're not living beyond your means in an obvious way. You're simply living the way life seems to naturally progress. A slightly better home, a more reliable car, a few more comforts that make daily life easier, things that feel deserved, things that feel normal. And that's exactly where the problem hides. It doesn't show up as a mistake. It doesn't feel like a bad decision. It feels like progress, which is why most people never question it deeply. They assume that as long as income continues to grow, everything else will eventually fall into place. That savings will happen naturally. That investing will become easier over time. That financial freedom is just a matter of patience. But what if that assumption is quietly misleading? What if the system most people follow almost guarantees that financial pressure stays with them, no matter how much they earn? Because here's the deeper issue. Income growth is visible. You can see it on your paycheck. But lifestyle growth is subtle. It happens gradually, quietly, almost automatically. And over time, it starts moving at the same speed or sometimes even faster than your income. So even though you're moving forward, it feels like you're staying in the same place, or worse, falling slightly behind. Not because you're doing something wrong in an obvious way, but because you're following a pattern that almost everyone around you is following as well. A pattern that feels normal, a pattern that feels safe, but a pattern that over time keeps wealth just out of reach. And once you start seeing this clearly, you begin to realize something important. The real issue isn't how much you earn. It's what happens quietly after you earn it. A very familiar life. Now let's bring this a little closer to reality, because this pattern becomes much clearer when you look at a normal, everyday life. Imagine someone in their early to mid-40s. They've done most things right. They studied, built a career, gained experience, and now they're earning a stable income. Nothing extraordinary, but solid. Let's say they earn around $75,000 a year in the United States, or a similar middle income level in parts of Europe. On paper, that sounds comfortable. But once taxes are deducted, the reality looks different. After federal, state, and other deductions, they're left with roughly $4,500 per month. That's the actual number they're working with, not the salary headline, but the usable income. Now let's follow that money step by step. The biggest portion usually goes toward housing. Rent or mortgage payments alone can easily take $1,700 to $2,000 per month, depending on the city. And this isn't luxury housing. It's a decent, safe, comfortable place to live, something that reflects their stage in life. Then comes transportation. A car payment, insurance, fuel, and maintenance together can add up to around $600 per month. Again, nothing excessive. Just a reliable vehicle that fits daily needs: commuting, errands, family responsibilities. Next are the essentials: groceries, electricity, internet, water, phone bills. These easily reach $700 or more, and these aren't optional. These are the basic costs of maintaining a normal standard of living. Then there are existing obligations. Student loans, which many people in this age group are still paying off, might take another $300 to $400 monthly. Credit card payments not from reckless spending, but accumulated over time add another layer. Even if managed responsibly, they still require regular payments. And then, there's lifestyle. This is where things become more subtle. Dining out occasionally, streaming subscriptions, small upgrades, weekend activities, gifts, social events, travel once or twice a year. Individually, these don't feel significant. $20 here, $50 there, maybe a few hundred across the month, but together they quietly reach $400 to $600. Not because of indulgence, but because this is what modern life looks like. And by the time you step back and look at the full picture, almost the entire $4,500 is already assigned, not wasted, not misused. Just distributed across a life that feels reasonable and earned. And that's the key detail. There's no clear point where you can say, this is the mistake. Everything seems justified. Housing reflects stability. The car reflects practicality. Expenses reflect responsibility. Lifestyle reflects balance. From the outside, this person looks financially stable. They have a career. They pay their bills. They live within what appears to be their means. But underneath that stability, there's very little margin. Savings, if any, are limited. Investments are often delayed. Unexpected expenses, medical bills, repairs, family needs can quickly disrupt everything. And that creates a constant, low-level pressure. Not panic, but tension. The sense that everything is fine as long as nothing goes wrong. And this is where many people quietly remain for years. Not moving backward, but not meaningfully moving forward either. Because even though the income is decent, it's fully absorbed by a lifestyle that has grown alongside it. And once that structure is in place, it becomes very difficult to step outside of it. The invisible shift at this point, nothing seems obviously wrong. The income is reasonable. The expenses are justified. The lifestyle feels appropriate for the stage of life. And that's exactly why this situation is so difficult to recognize. Because the real issue doesn't come from one big decision. It comes from a series of small, almost invisible shifts that happen over time. No single upgrade feels like a mistake. In fact, each one feels logical. You move into a slightly better home, not to impress anyone, but because you want more comfort, more space, maybe a better neighborhood. You replace your old car, not out of luxury, but because reliability matters, and you can now afford something newer. You start spending a little more on food, choosing convenience over effort, quality over price. You travel a bit more because after years of working, it feels deserved. Individually, none of these decisions are extreme. They don't feel reckless. They don't feel irresponsible. They feel like progress. And that's where the shift begins. Because these upgrades don't happen all at once. They happen gradually. So gradually, in fact, that you barely notice the total impact. A small increase here. Another adjustment there. A slightly higher standard becomes normal. And once something becomes normal, it stops feeling like a choice. It starts feeling like a necessity. That's the moment when lifestyle quietly locks in. At first, you chose the higher rent. Now, you have to pay it. At first, you chose the car upgrade. Now, it's a fixed monthly obligation. At first, dining out was occasional. Now, it's part of your routine. What used to feel flexible becomes fixed. And over time, more and more of your income gets tied to these fixed structures. This is the invisible shift most people never fully see. Because from the outside, it still looks like stability. There's no sudden financial crash, no obvious overspending. Just a life that slowly becomes more expensive to maintain. And here's where it becomes even more important. Income doesn't usually grow in a smooth, continuous line. Raises come occasionally. Promotions take time. Sometimes income even stays flat for years. But lifestyle adjusts much faster. It reacts immediately to any increase. The moment there's a little extra income, it finds a place to go. And rarely does it flow toward long-term wealth. It flows toward improving the present, making life easier, more comfortable, more enjoyable. Again, none of this is wrong. But when it happens automatically, without awareness, it creates a pattern where expenses rise almost in sync with income, and sometimes even slightly ahead of it. So instead of creating space, income increases simply support a more expensive version of the same life. That's why many people feel like they're running in place. They're earning more than ever before, but their financial position hasn't fundamentally changed. The margin hasn't expanded. The flexibility hasn't improved. And the ability to build real, lasting wealth remains limited, not because they made a big mistake, but because they never noticed the small ones adding up. And once this pattern repeats over several years, it becomes deeply embedded, not just in finances, but in expectations, habits, and daily life, which makes it much harder to break later on. Because now, it's no longer about changing numbers, it's about changing what feels normal. The math most people ignore up to this point, everything we've discussed can still feel a bit abstract. Lifestyle grows, expenses increase, savings stay limited. But the real impact becomes much clearer when you reduce it to something very simple. Numbers, not complex financial models, not advanced investing strategies, just basic everyday math. Because once you look at the numbers honestly, the pattern becomes difficult to ignore. Let's go back to a common situation. You receive a raise at work. After taxes, your monthly income increases by $1,000. This should be a meaningful shift. An extra $1,000 per month is not small. Over a year, that's $12,000. Over 10 years, that's $120,000 without even considering investment growth. On its own, that kind of increase has the potential to significantly change your financial future. But now let's look at what often happens in reality. Not immediately, but gradually, over the next several months. You start adjusting your living situation. Maybe your current place feels a bit tight or outdated. So you upgrade. Your rent increases by $300. Again, this doesn't feel extreme. It feels like a natural step forward. Then you reconsider your car. Maybe it's getting older, maybe maintenance is becoming annoying. Now that you're earning more, a newer car feels reasonable. Your monthly transportation cost increases by another $250. Then come the smaller changes. You eat out a bit more often. You choose convenience over saving time. You subscribe to a few more services. You travel slightly more comfortably. These don't feel like major expenses individually, but together they add another $300 per month. Now pause for a moment. Out of the $1,000 increase, $300 went to housing. $250 went to the car. $300 went to lifestyle adjustments. That's $850 already allocated. What remains is $150, not $1,000, just $150. And that's the number that determines your future, because that's what's left for saving, investing, or building anything long-term. Now let's extend this over time. If you had kept the full $1,000, you could save $12,000 per year. Over 10 years, that's $120,000 before any investment returns. If that money were invested, the number could be significantly higher. But with only $150 per month left, you're saving $1,800 per year. Over 10 years, that's just $18,000. The difference between these two paths is over $100,000. And again, this didn't come from a bad decision. It came from a series of reasonable ones. That's what makes this so important. Because most people never experience a financial collapse. They experience a gradual narrowing of opportunity. Each upgrade slightly reduces what could have been built. Each adjustment slightly delays financial progress. And over time, these small differences compound into something much larger. Not just in numbers, but in options. With higher savings, you have flexibility. You can handle unexpected events more easily. You can consider career changes. You can reduce stress about the future. With lower savings, even at a higher income, you remain dependent on that income. The margin stays thin, and that creates a quiet form of risk, not immediate, but long-term. So when people say, "I just need to earn more," they're not entirely wrong. But they're only looking at half of the equation. Because what truly matters isn't just how much comes in, it's how much remains after everything else quietly takes its share. The psychology behind it at this stage, the numbers are clear. Income increases don't automatically lead to wealth. Expenses rise quietly, and the gap remains small. But this leads to a deeper question. If the pattern is so predictable, why do so many people follow it without realizing? The answer isn't financial. It's psychological. Because money decisions, especially in everyday life, are rarely made through logic alone. They're influenced by how we feel, how we see ourselves, and how we relate to the world around us. One of the strongest drivers is something very simple, the need to feel progress. When you work harder, gain experience, and earn more, you expect your life to reflect that effort, not just in numbers, but in visible, tangible ways. A better home, a more comfortable car, easier routines, fewer daily inconveniences. These changes aren't about showing off. They're about alignment, your external life catching up with your internal sense of growth, and that's completely natural. But here's where it becomes complicated, because lifestyle improvements are immediate. You can see them, you can feel them. They improve your daily experience right away. Wealth building, on the other hand, is slow. Saving money doesn't feel exciting. Investing doesn't immediately change your day-to-day life. The benefits are distant, sometimes years or decades away. So naturally, the mind prioritizes what feels real today over what might matter later. There's another layer to this as well: social comparison. Even if you're not actively trying to compete with others, you're constantly exposed to how people around you live. Colleagues upgrade their homes. Friends buy newer cars. People in your circle travel, dine out, and enjoy certain comforts. Over time, these things redefine what feels normal, not luxurious, just expected. And once something feels normal, choosing less can feel like falling behind, even if, logically, you know it might be the smarter decision. This creates a quiet pressure, not spoken, not forced, but always present. A pressure to maintain a certain standard of living that matches your income and environment. And then there's adaptation. Human beings adjust very quickly to improvements. The first time you upgrade something, it feels significant. But over time, that new level becomes your baseline. What once felt like a luxury becomes a necessity. And once it becomes a necessity, it's no longer questioned. It's simply part of life. This is why reducing expenses later feels so difficult. It's not just about cutting costs. It feels like giving something up, like moving backward, even if that step back could create long-term stability. So instead, most people continue moving forward in the same direction, earning more, spending slightly more, maintaining the balance. Not because they're careless, but because the system is designed to feel comfortable. Immediate rewards are visible, long-term benefits are invisible, and the human mind naturally leans toward what it can see and feel right now, which is why this pattern repeats across income levels. Whether someone earns $50,000 or $150,000, the same psychological forces apply. The lifestyle adjusts. Expectations rise, the gap remains limited. And without conscious awareness, this cycle continues for years, even decades. Not as a result of poor decisions, but as a result of very human ones. A different way to think once you see this pattern clearly. It changes the way you look at income, expenses, and progress. Because the issue was never about earning more, and it was never about cutting everything back or living in extreme restriction. The real shift begins with something much simpler: how you think about the gap between what you earn and what you keep. Most people focus almost entirely on the first part, income. They measure success by salary increases, promotions, or higher paying opportunities. And while those things matter, they don't tell the full story. Because two people can earn the same amount, live in similar cities, have similar responsibilities, and still end up in completely different financial positions over time. The difference is not dramatic. It doesn't come from one bold decision. It comes from how they treat that gap. Financially aware individuals don't rush to upgrade their lives every time income increases. They pause, not forever, but long enough to make a conscious decision. When their income rises, they don't immediately ask, "What can I improve in my lifestyle?" They ask something slightly different: what portion of this increase can remain untouched? This is a subtle shift, but it changes everything, because instead of allowing lifestyle to expand automatically, they create space first. And that space becomes the foundation for wealth. At the beginning, it doesn't look impressive. It might just be a few $100s per month, money that doesn't go toward visible upgrades, money that doesn't change how their life looks from the outside. But over time, that's exactly what makes the difference. Because that unused portion doesn't stay idle. It gets directed into something that grows quietly: savings accounts, long-term investments, retirement funds, not aggressively, not perfectly, just consistently. And consistency over long periods starts to compound. What began as a small gap slowly becomes something more meaningful. A year passes, and there's a noticeable cushion. A few years pass, and there's real stability. A decade passes, and the situation looks entirely different, not because of extreme discipline, but because of repeated, intentional decisions. There's another important difference as well. Financially aware people don't eliminate lifestyle improvements. They still upgrade their lives, but they do it selectively. Not every raise leads to higher expenses. Not every opportunity becomes a reason to spend more. They choose which areas truly matter to them. Maybe they value travel, but keep housing modest. Maybe they prefer comfort at home, but avoid unnecessary car upgrades. The point isn't to avoid spending, it's to avoid automatic spending. Because automatic behavior is what created the problem in the first place. Over time, this approach leads to something that many people don't expect: a sense of control, not just over money, but over decisions. Expenses no longer feel fixed and overwhelming. Income no longer feels fully committed before it even arrives. There's flexibility, and with flexibility comes options. The ability to handle unexpected situations without stress. The ability to make career choices without immediate financial pressure. The ability to think long-term without sacrificing the present completely. And perhaps most importantly, a shift in how progress is measured, not by what life looks like from the outside, but by how stable and independent it feels from the inside. Because in the end, wealth isn't about appearance, it's about space. Space to think, space to choose, space to move without constant financial tension. And that space doesn't come from earning more alone. It comes from what you decide not to spend.